Okay, everyone, if you could please take your seats.
Yes.
We don't know whose it is.
Excuse me, does anybody own this? It does actually have a... It's yours. Fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to speak to you very quickly. We've got three people who are speaking on a plenary now, and that will be closely followed by the walk, talk, tours and workshops. You'll have 15 minutes to get to the start of your walk or talk, so please gather on the oak lawn, just down the path where you'll see the oak tree which has fallen over. Well, it looks pretty terrific, I think. After your walk or talk, your shepherds will assist you to return to Mueller Hall. So it doesn't matter where you've been taken over the gardens, they do know their way back. Yes. Yeah, that'll be fine. And I think that's it. Thank you very much. Enjoy your next walk.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Rosemary, and I have the great pleasure to introduce three internal gardens people who do a wonderful job here. Firstly, Claire Hart, who's the manager of horticulture at Melbourne, and she's been here. Claire's been here the least long of these people. She's only been here 4 years. Chris Cole in the middle, I think, has been here about 10. And 12, sorry. And he's the executive director of the Melbourne RBG. And Andrew Laidlaw on the end, who I'm sure some of you know, is our wonderful landscape architect. And as you progress around the gardens over the next few days, you'll see a lot of Andrew's fantastic designs, including the volcano, the arid garden, the children's garden, etc. So I'm sure they're going to give us a wonderful presentation about how climate change is being addressed here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Can you hear me at the back? Okay. Good. Okay. Well, lovely to be here, and great to see such an amazing turnout post-COVID. I guess this is your first Congress post-COVID, so we had one just the other week, the Global Botanic Gardens Congress that many of you will be aware of, just at the Exhibition Centre in Melbourne. It was wonderful to see so many colleagues who we hadn't seen for quite a number of years, so a warm welcome from me. Before we get started, I'd just like to undertake an acknowledgement of country. And that is that I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Wurundjeri, Wurrung and Bunurong peoples, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today. Just an introduction in regard to what we'll be aiming to cover today. We're hoping to have a fairly interactive session. We'll start off with some presentations by myself, Claire and Andrew, and then we'll go into a bit of a Q&A with Andrew and Claire, and if we have time, we may have some questions from the audience, but we'll just see how we go. So I'll do a brief introduction to the gardens themselves and the organisation. We'll also be covering strategic planning at RBG Melbourne. One of which those topics is landscape succession strategy, which we'll cover in more detail, and both myself and Claire will be talking on that topic. We'll also introduce you to the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens and the recently released climate assessment tool. We'll then move on to Andrew. Andrew is our landscape architect here, who'll be talking about landscape design and master plan projects. And we'll finish up with a panel discussion and some Q&A. A beautiful aerial shot of Melbourne Gardens, and I hope you do get time to spend some time in the Melbourne Gardens themselves. They are an absolutely magnificent gardens, and for 175 years the gardens have provided a really special place for people to connect and interact with nature, and it is of course only minutes away from the bustling CBD of Melbourne itself. It is a much-loved green sanctuary, and Melbourne Gardens has maintained its position as one of the world's finest botanic gardens, enabling research across all sectors and promoting excellence in horticulture, biodiversity conservation, tourism and public engagement. We have around 2 million visitors per annum, including over 25,000 school children on specific education programmes. And of course, hundreds of thousands attending our numerous functions and events throughout the year. The garden itself is situated in the broader King's Domain, which is 120 hectares in size and managed by the City of Melbourne. For those of you that don't know the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria, it consists of 2 physical sites, both Melbourne Gardens and Cranbourne Gardens, which I know you'll also be visiting during the conference. And a quick snapshot of the organisation. We employ around about 200 staff, and we're split across 5 teams. And we're headed up by our CEO, Professor Tim Entwistle. So we have Melbourne Gardens, the site that you're at today, and also Cranbourne Gardens, which is a 363 hectare award-winning garden dedicated to showcasing plants from Australia. And it has also surrounding conservation bushland, which has incredibly high and important value. We also have teams dedicated to science, undertaking research and collections, engagement and impact for our programming and audience development and marketing, and also our corporate team as well. Just a little bit more information about the gardens themselves. The character and heritage of the gardens is quite distinct, and there are 2 very different heritage qualities across the site. I saw many of you this morning up at the Melbourne Observatory site, and you would have witnessed quite a different feel and character to that Melbourne Observatory site to what is the majority of the gardens. The Melbourne Observatory site, which we also manage, is only 2 hectares and is really a collection of heritage buildings, heroic heritage buildings set in simple lawns and garden beds. In contrast to the 36 hectares of the Guilfoylean landscape, which is the original Botanic Gardens that you'll spend most of your time in. It is a Guilfoylean landscape with intricate planting, sweeping lawns, beautiful vistas, curvilinear pathways and water features and panoramic views. And the overall layout of the Melbourne Gardens themselves dates back to late Guilfoyle times, around about 1908. The entire gardens are listed on the Heritage Register, and the observatory site is listed on the National Register. So what that means for us as land managers is that any significant changes that the gardens go through, we have to go through a very rigorous planning process with the statutory authority. So just some quick facts and figures for you there, and I'll start off with the Aboriginal history of the site. So the site of Melbourne Gardens and Birrarung, also known as Yarra River, is part of the traditional lands of the Aboriginal people, today described as members of the Kulin Nation, with the area inhabited for tens of thousands of years. The area the gardens occupies would have been a plentiful and varied source of food and important material for Aboriginal people back in the day. Land for the gardens was reserved for Botanic Gardens purposes in 1846, which is only 11 years after Melbourne was founded itself in 1835. And several directors have been key in shaping the gardens as we see them today. And two will be familiar to quite a few of you, I'm sure. Ferdinand von Mueller, 1857 to 1873, was the first director and government botanist of the Melbourne Botanic Gardens. Mueller really brought many new plants to the gardens, but unfortunately his plantings and his landscape modelling lacked inspiration, with layouts in a systematic order, placing little value on aesthetics. And he really fell out of favour with the general public and his superiors, and he was basically asked to resign from his position, but he still maintained the position of government botanist. That's when William Guilfoyle came in. He was an Englishman, 1873 to 1909, so Guilfoyle was the second director for 36 years. And he was appointed, and he set out about remodelling the gardens, basically relocating hundreds of semi-mature trees that Mueller had planted, and crafting the landscape form that we see today in the really beautiful gardenesque and picturesque style. He created beautiful sweeping lawns, curvy linear paths, broad vistas, and a delicate balance of reveal and enclosure using mass and void, with intricate plantings that enveloped visitors in a beautiful garden experience. It's fair to say the garden went through a period of consolidation during most of the 20th century, and in 1992 the Royal Botanic Gardens Board was formed and a new CEO, Dr. Philip Moores, was appointed. And during these 20 years, which Phil was CEO, he really got the gardens back on track to a large extent and was responsible for developing the first gardens master plan, which I know Andrew will talk more on a little bit later, and many subsequent initiatives which still exist today: the Observatory Gate development, the Children's Garden, and the revitalisation of Guilfoyle's volcano. This great work continues today with our current CEO, Tim Entwistle. The plants, a really important part of the gardens. We have around about 50,000 plants in Melbourne Gardens, including 5,500 trees and 7,500 taxa across the whole site, from over 192 countries around the world. So it truly is a garden that represents the flora of the world. Embedded within the garden are 23 stunning living plant collections which Claire Hart and her team curate so wonderfully. They're all expertly managed by individual curators under the framework of our 20-year living collections plan. I just wanted to share with you a bit of our approach in regard to strategic planning. It's something that I'm very passionate about at Melbourne Gardens, and it's been one of the key drivers of my work for the past 12 or so years. And on the left, your left, yeah, is the Royal Botanic Gardens, Victoria Melbourne Gardens master plan, which Andrew and I really drove as a project. It took us 4 years to complete, and it's something that we're incredibly proud of as an organisation, but also as individuals. And it really forms the blueprint for the work that we do, and indeed all the work that Melbourne Gardens does on this site in terms of developing. It's fair to say it's not an easy task to develop a master plan for a garden such as this. The stakeholder engagement, as I'm sure you can appreciate, was intense and extensive. I think we had over 100 meetings and workshops and countless question and answer sessions to work through, but all a really rich and rewarding experience, and we learned a lot through that. And it's great that we've got that plan in place now to guide the direction of these gardens for the next 20 years. On the other side is the Living Collections Plan, which Claire Hart has predominantly been responsible for. This is a wonderful plan, again a 20-year document to be released very soon, Claire, by December. We need to get it in by 2022. It really does shape the future of our living collections within our beautiful gardens. Each of those 23 collections I mentioned is described in significant detail in terms of the collections, the plant collections it holds, but also the future direction of those collections and how they fit in with our other strategic planning documents. We also have conservation management plans and a Royal Botanic Gardens tree plan, which are also looking to launch this year as well. So a really powerful suite of strategic documents. And the final one, which I'd like to share with you, some of you may be aware, is the much publicised landscape succession strategy, which was released in 2016. And it really was a plan that we developed in response to climate change, which is the main thrust of the talk here today. Melbourne Gardens embarked on its response to climate change and water challenges around about 2000, at the start of the Millennium Drought. And indeed, for the first 10 years of that Millennium Drought, it was really about saving water and how we could manage these gardens with less water while still providing the beautiful landscape that you see today. As we learned more about climate change, we became aware that we really needed a documented plan to help steer us through the next 20 years. And in 2016, this document was released. We know that Melbourne is going to get 3 to 4 degrees hotter by 2090 and up to 10% drier. And as we've seen over the past year or two, far more significant storm events, and our landscape needs to be able to respond to that. So the current thrust of the landscape succession strategy is to manage succession of the current landscape at Melbourne towards one that is dominated by resilient species of 2090, whilst also maintaining the really important heritage character that we have in the gardens. So to the general public, not a lot will change over the next 20 years, except that the plants that we have within the gardens and the infrastructure that we implement within the gardens will be suitable for that future climate of 2090. Whenever we put a new plant in the ground now, we do a cross-check to make sure that, particularly if it's a tree, a long-lived species, that tree is not only going to survive by 2090, but is going to thrive as well. And just to give you an idea of some of the high-level actions that we have within the landscape succession strategy, and I've just picked a few out here. There are a lot more documented in the plan, which is available on our website, along with the master plan, which I've just shared with you, and also the living collections plan will be on there too. So by 2036, we want to have 75% of our taxa suited to the projected climate of 2090. Currently, that's 45%, so obviously we've got work to do, and we also know that 33% are low to moderately vulnerable in that future climate. We, of course, want to maximise sustainable water use. Currently, we have 40% stormwater offset. So we collect 40% of our water that we use in our irrigation system off surrounding streets. It goes through various treatments, and then we put it back through our irrigation system, thus saving us 40% on potable water use. We want to get that up to 100%. By 2036, we want to have 35% of our collections as wild-sourced provenance plants. Currently, we have 22%, and Claire and her team are actively collecting with other areas of the organisation to increase this number. And importantly, we want to improve the understanding of the impacts on climate change on botanical landscapes and help people learn and help them on their journey in response to climate change. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Claire Hart, who's our Manager of Horticulture, to talk to you more about the Landscape Succession Strategy and the Climate Change Alliance.
Thanks, Chris. I will directly follow on with just a little bit about landscape succession strategy, but then also go into some of the things that we've been doing with the Climate Change Alliance Botanic Gardens and two of the new tools that we've recently just launched, and one is the Landscape Succession Toolkit and also the CAT, or the Climate Assessment Tool. So we have the kit and the CAT. So in regards to the landscape succession strategy, it needs to be inclusive of all staff and not just a management document. We're all part of the climate change story and hence all involved in influencing change. So this image here, I'd like to introduce you to Amy Downey. Now, Amy is one of our previous apprentices who is now a full-time horticulturist with us, and she's curator of the Grey Garden. So when Amy started working with us, the landscape succession strategy was just recently launched, and for her, landscape succession is what a horticulturalist does. All her developments in the Grey Garden are through the lens of landscape succession, such as the inclusion of the first palm, the Bismarckia nobilis, which was assessed using our climate risk module in our living collections database, and which guided the selection for its climate suitability. But some of the decisions that we make may test the natural range of a plant, and they are an experiment. And the Bismarckias certainly did not enjoy our very cold Melbourne winter. But Amy will monitor and assess their growth and adaptation in our landscape, because the more we know, the more we're able to pass on. Amy is the new horticulturist, our future and landscape succession in action. One of the most successful actions of the landscape succession strategy is the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens. And the Alliance is a direct result of a networking and collaboration action that arose from the strategy. For a couple of years after its publication, the strategy was presented at a number of international conferences and very well received, as at the time no one else was doing such extensive future planning. The interest in the strategy was the catalyst for the first Botanic Gardens Climate Change Summit, hosted here in Melbourne in December 2018. The summit was an opportunity to discuss climate change as it specifically affected Botanic Gardens and what steps needed to be taken to safeguard our gardens and living collections for the future. It was from this summit that the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens was founded and the Melbourne Declaration was signed, and all agreed that the time for action is now. The membership for the Alliance now extends to over 500 botanic gardens, arboreta and organisations across the globe, and is a very powerful network by which to connect and share knowledge and research. Melbourne Gardens has held the Secretariat for the Alliance for the past 4 years, and even during COVID, we've been able to present at international conferences like the American Public Gardens Association, and contribute articles to journals like Seboldia, which is the International Journal for Botanic Garden and Horticulture, and also present a number of online horticultural forums across multiple time zones. So we've still been able to connect during what has been a very challenging time. But further, during this time, we've also developed two important, and I stress free, I'll say it again, free tools. The Landscape Succession Toolkit and the Climate Assessment Tool. As I mentioned, the kit and the cat. Both were launched at the recent Global Botanic Gardens Congress that was held here in Melbourne. So I'm going to give you just a very, very brief overview, and I'll give you the details for where you can find the kit and the cat, both on websites. So go to the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria website, but also Botanic Gardens Conservation International website. I'll give you those details a little further on. I just wanted to stress this is very high level and just a very simple way to describe what has been years and years of work. So the kit, as I was mentioning, the Landscape Succession Toolkit, is really a result of, I'm just going to go back here, the Melbourne Landscape Succession Strategy, and it repackages everything we did in our strategy as a framework that can be applied to any botanic garden in any context. So this is the cover here. It's about a 50-page document, and it really steps you through everything you need to know to create your own landscape succession strategy. And just about the cover, we decided that this was a fairly striking image, and it really struck to the core of what is the toolkit. We didn't want to have an image that evoked maybe what was glossy, what was a beautiful forest, or a bunch of beautiful leaves. We thought we really needed to go a little bit deeper here and look at the concept of time, the deep expanse of time by which climate change is truly measured, as this is what we really need to be planning for. The goals of the toolkit are to aid botanic gardens and arboreta around the world to adapt their landscapes and living collections to climate change. The toolkit importantly offers practical advice on how to create your own strategy, breaking down what you need to do into easy, manageable ideas and processes, which is the best way to approach climate adaptation. So lots of small steps, or what we call tiny tasks. And of course, having a strategy is one thing, but implementing it and turning it into actions is another. So where do you start? This is a really simple representation. This is one of the pages that's in the toolkit. And it gives you just a really easy breakdown of what you need to be doing to start your landscape succession strategy or plan. So develop an understanding of climate change starting now, and that can really be as simple as looking at your garden and looking at predicted future temperatures. And that information can be found as simply on, I'll say the BOM, but the Bureau of Meteorology, and things like the Atlas of Living Australia. They're going to be a great resource for you to start with. You also need to identify risks to your organisation or garden, and there are many ways to do this, and again, risk will vary greatly from one garden to the next. Using predictive methods, and I'll talk about that in a second, with the climate assessment tool, because that will really help. Collaborate and network, so basically what you're doing right now. This conference, the toolkit, the alliance, these are all collaborations that you can easily be a part of. And one of the big things is continuous improvement. You need to continue to assess, to monitor, to alter. As climate change is not a project, it has no finish date, it's a continuum. So as I mentioned earlier, you can view and download the comprehensive and free Landscape Succession Toolkit here. You just need to go to the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria website. You go to Initiatives, Climate Change, the toolkit is sitting there waiting for you. Now about the CAT, or the Climate Assessment Tool. Another initiative developed over the last 2 years by the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, University of Tasmania, and also with seeding fund from the International Association of Botanic Gardens. I'll give you the address now, which is cat.bgci.org, super easy. Again, I'll reference it at the end as well. So why is a climate assessment tool important? The management of plants in horticultural and botanical landscapes are traditionally informed by past experience and previous observations. The climate crisis will bring temperatures and conditions that our living landscapes have never experienced before, and this will become our new normal, or it kind of is our new normal. The Climate Assessment Tool, or the CAT, provides guidance on the likely suitability of taxa to the predicted future climate scenarios of a selected location or garden. It achieves this by taking data sets of current known occurrences of taxa, so those observed in the wild, in botanic gardens, and in general cultivation. And it compares the current climate of these known occurrences to the selected predicted climate. By comparing the two climates, a suitability score can be generated, and that gives you an idea of whether that plant, in this case that tree, is going to be suitable for future warmer climates of 2050 and 2090. And here's some of the benefits. It really does help you to evaluate your existing landscapes and future integrity so that you know that they're going to be the same. Again, as Chris was talking about before, we are changing our landscape now in order to stay the same. We want our garden to look the same as it does now, but with taxa that are climate suited for that 2070, 2090 climate. The CAT also helps you with evaluating and selecting new plant collections. So your future collections may need to be climate suited. So you may need to be looking at duplicating some of your collections elsewhere. And this addresses that next point about vulnerabilities and rare and threatened species. Sharing your collections with other gardens is a great way to do that. And of course, plant conservation. So identifying opportunities for meta collection, so that very broad collection which goes beyond our local, national, and really connects with our international botanical partners. So I can't provide a live demonstration, I'd love to, but seriously, if you go to that website that I've just given you earlier, you're going to be able to access and use the CAT live as soon as you leave here, if you like. But I can give you an example, just a basic example of how it works. And there are 3 things that you need to enter once you do go to the website. And it's basically your garden or a location, the taxa or genus species that you want to check out, and then you just collect or select a climate scenario that you'd like to assess. It's that easy. And I'll show you the Eucalyptus grandis that we ran through with the cat. I've used Chris Cole there as scale, just so you know just how well this plant has grown over the last few years. So this Eucalyptus grandis was wild collected in southern Queensland by Melbourne Gardens horticulture team. But the question is it climate suited? So we ran it through the climate assessment tool and assessed its suitability for our current climate. And mean annual temperature is a good proxy for a variety of other environmental factors and is used here as a broad indication of suitability to climate. And the mean annual temperature for Melbourne at the moment is approximately 15 degrees, as highlighted in that black vertical border there. So you can see just at the top there, it says 15. And according to its natural distribution, we are using that GBIF data, so that's the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. So just under source there, you see the data sets that we're using. So you've got 2 sets of GBIF data. What it tells us is that this tree is on the edge of its known occurrences in terms of cold tolerance, which may suggest planting it somewhere sheltered. However, when looking at the urban plants and plant search data sets of cultivated specimens in botanic gardens and urban plantings, this species is demonstrated as being comfortable growing in climates cooler than its natural distribution would suggest. So we can confidently plant it out in the landscape right now in our current climate with little additional care. And as you can see, it's actually thriving. But now looking at the projected climate of 2090, Melbourne has a mean annual temperature of 19 degrees. We can see that the Eucalyptus grandis is very comfortable growing at these warmer temperatures and is likely to do very well out in the landscape. So again, I'll just draw your attention to the 19 degrees and just follow it down. So you can see that 3 species mostly occurs at this temperature, so it's enjoying those warmer conditions of 2090. I won't, but the Eucalyptus grandis will. But I need to stress that this tool is a guide. It's a guide to inform your decision making, as there are many other factors that you need to consider. Soil, water, what kind of plants you are growing, or what your garden's plans and risks are as well. But what the CAT does do, it allows you to confidently think about future climates and think more broadly. It allows you to take actions now to support your future living collections. And just if you're wondering where we're getting these projected climate scenarios, we've used the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recent report, so the IPCC most recent report. Thought I'd finish on something like an opportunity rather than take you down such a challenging path with a future climate. And here's an opportunity that presented us. So Alliance founding member, the Moreton Arboretum, represented here by Murphy Westwood, and BGCI representative Abby Meyer, planning the Quercus engelmannii, with curator of the oak collection Peter Burby at Melbourne Gardens during the recent Global Botanic Gardens Congress. So we took that opportunity to bring some people in and ask them, would you like to plant a tree that's climate suited for our future? And of course, everybody does. So Botanic Gardens Conservation International will host the CAT, or the climate assessment tool, on behalf of the Alliance. And it's available publicly on the BGCI website now, cat.bgci.org, and I encourage you all to take a look. Again, after all the work of finding, selecting, acquiring, and in this case, with the Quercus engelmannii, we had to import and propagate climate-suited material, it's incredibly important that you celebrate your landscape succession work, because everyone loves planting a tree. Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Claire. Actually, that's already moved a slide for... Oh, that's all right, that's good. Sorry, I'm just going to have to... Okay, yes, look, my name's Andrew Laidlaw, and it's a privilege to be able to talk to you. For a long time now, I've been here 25 years, and I've worked with the guides, and the guides play a very important role in communicating our stories and the work that we all do in here. And some of the, as Chris and Claire have beautifully pointed out, a lot of our work has quite a sophistication to it. So, you know, annually I'll often meet with the guides through Jane and communicate the work we're doing so that the guides can go out and actually communicate that to the general public. And it's really important that those levels of sophistication are actually understood and passed on, and it's a really key role that the guides play for us. So my basically my work plan is guided, and the entire organisation in some way has come on board to this idea of having master plans. And I started back here in 1997, and under Phil Moore's we created the first master plan, and there was a lot of work went into that, not by myself but by the entire staff of the RBG. But master plans are an incredibly important document, and I would encourage everybody that's involved in gardens to try, big complex gardens, botanic gardens, to try and encourage people as a starting to get a master plan organised. And even in a home garden, a large home garden, a master plan is no different. It sort of looks at the big picture, it looks at all the relationships that need to happen on that garden, it looks at all the pressure points, it looks at all the different stakeholders, and it comes up with the best option or the best plan it can at the time, and it actually allows everybody to sign off on that. So it becomes like an agreed vision, which is really, really important for us to then be able to go out and achieve the work we do. And many gardens are crippled actually because there's too many people wanting to have a say, there's too many people with great ideas, but actually a master plan is the tool that allows you to activate those things. But it has to be culturally accepted right through the organisation. So from our horticulturalists up to our senior managers, everybody has to come on board. And it's taken us a long time, and I really, Chris is fantastic at this, at really directing us, channeling us always back through the master plan. It doesn't mean that everything we do has been identified in the master plans, because opportunities arise, but a master plan is this great starting point. Now, this just shows the 3 documents that I've been involved in, because I'm very old and been here a long time. On the other side, it shows how complex the process is. So, you know, we set a brief, we try to understand what our main goals are, and then we go out and we go through a whole listening phase, and we involve all our stakeholders. So it's actually quite complex, and Chris touched on that we had over 100 presentations. We then come back with our ideas, and then we go back and we present those and we get feedback, and then we finally get that signed off. And then it's from that point that I can then get involved in doing projects. And that also activates our other plans, which is our landscape succession plan, which is embedded in all the things we're hoping to achieve in the master plan. And then the tools that Claire talked about, they're actually down and being activated very much in our projects and our living collections. I'll move on. So what the master plan actually allows us to do is to move ahead with everybody really on board. And while lots of people don't quite understand the nuts and bolts of what you're going to do, what we try, and the last bit of the master plan basically sets out the projects we're going to try and achieve over a time frame. So, you know, we're going to try and do this project, and this project. They're new projects to the gardens, but we're also going to upgrade our infrastructure as well. We're going to improve our stormwater or our pavement. So it builds everything into a time frame, which is really good. So we've been able to go out and actually, I think, probably better than many botanic gardens, actually maintain and hold our historic integrity, but at the same time build in a whole lot of new contemporary gardens. And building in new contemporary gardens, you're just not doing it because it's a fashion, you're doing it because things change and gardens need to change and gardens need to respond to contemporary needs. And things around accessibility, around equality, around safety, all these things are changing. There's different demands on a garden all the time. So we've been actually, I think, be able to keep pace with those, as well as bring in new projects which create new energy and life in a garden. Now, believe it or not, the one I was just going to show you quickly is the children's garden, which is an amazing garden, something that we built back in 2000. It took 3 or 4 years to plan it. It wasn't included in the 1997 master plan, but the opportunity arose, and because we had the master plan, we were able to put it into context of everything else that we were doing, and we were able to build that children's garden, and it's been really a successful space. And you know, it's an idea or it's an example of a new project that actually brings in a whole different demographic to this Botanic Gardens. And Botanic Gardens have to be very careful that they don't become old fuddy-duddy places and that they don't become intellectual places, so that they can do all these things. And so what we're often trying to do here is create spaces for a broader range of people. And through the Children's Garden, we're getting in, somewhere between 250 and 300,000 children and families into this garden that probably weren't visiting a Botanic Gardens at all. So, and it's a very different language in there, and one of our challenges is that when they go out into the bigger garden, there's a different language, but it's been really a successful space. And it's an intense space. It's one of our living collections, and we have a fantastic curator in there at the moment, Jenny, who really works with the Vol Guides as well and has creating an ongoing beautiful garden. Another really important project that we built in 2010 was Guilfoyle's volcano. But again, we talk about changing needs and keeping up with really what contemporary sustainability work is. And we had a lake in the Botanic Gardens that was, had blue-green algae outbreaks, we had mud flats, we had real lack of flow. So while we built the volcano, and it was a beautiful landscape, and it was a call back to Guilfoyle's old design, the other really important part of this project was the working wetlands. And this is, so we finished the volcano as a landscape project, which was fantastic. Allowed us to really create a new palette of planting up there. It really worked a lot with succulents, and it was built in a part of the gardens that the master plan had identified as our arid precinct. So in terms of landscape succession, this kind of garden is really part of that process of making this garden much more sustainable into the future. But it also had this working wetlands element to it. So we had to work out how we were going to fill the volcano and how we were going to continue to circulate the water around the whole gardens. And so what we did is we then went into this next part of the project, or stage 2 or 3 it was by that stage, wasn't it, Chris? Yeah, where we looked at actually diverting a lot of the storm water into the gardens, an extra 70 meg of water, bringing that into the Nymphaea Lake and the main lake, and then adding a whole range of treatment. A lot of that treatment is floating islands, which you can see sitting up in the volcano, and then a whole system of pumps that move that water. So every 30 days, we're almost circulating the entire water of the lake, and that's moving around the gardens. It brought water to the fern gully, and it allows us to actually sometimes take up to 40 to 50% of water off for irrigation in good times. This actually went to the heart of the health of the gardens, this project. We were in a place that the gardens in some ways was struggling. You can imagine what it was like to try and hold a wedding down on Dog Flat when there were mud flats and blue-green algae outbreaks. So in a way, the working wetlands was an incredibly important project that came on the back of the volcano. Again, it's hard work for the staff. We actually have to, and I say we because occasionally Chris and I and Claire are out there doing this work as well. But when you have floating islands, you're pushing that water through the root zone of these floating islands. They taking up those nitrates and phosphates. Then you've got to harvest that all off, and you've got to put that into green waste, so it adds a whole load of work to the gardens, but it's really important in terms of the health of the waterways. This is just an example of the Hort staff actually cutting the floating islands in the volcano down. The other project and the working wetlands was involved in terms of bringing extra water and life to the fern gully, but this is a really important project that the Friends helped us with, that Chris and I have been involved in for over 10 years and just finished in 2020 with the sensory garden. But this is really the revitalisation of the fern gully. And the fern gully, through the lack of water, but also we had flying foxes, and we had a terrible path down there that continually had to be closed because of trip hazards. And we had a little bit of a fight with Heritage Victoria because it was the original path. But again, I come back to the point of change. So we've actually put an elevated walkway in there, which is an all abilities access path. It's much better for tree health, and we've improved the whole feeling of the fern gully. It's just an immense change in the fern gully. And so this is also another living collection where Misha works, and we've got a real focus on Victorian ferns here. But even more recently, so the first thing we did is we put the boardwalk in, and then more recently we were able to build 3 meditation gardens, which have stories embedded in them of loss, where people have donated us these money to build these. But these are immersive experiences. This is where people can actually come into they can come into the gardens, they can come into the fern gully, and they can even go deeper and sit within these wellbeing gardens, which are designed basically for people just to connect to nature through this beautiful, beautiful environment. The fern gully also has a response to climate change. I mean, the fern gully can be up to, well, I've been listening to Chris Cole say it can be up to 6 degrees cooler. I know it certainly has been 3 to 4 degrees, but it's amazing the change in hot weather, that environment down in the fern gully. So again, through our master planning, we've been able to provide the framework for us to go in and actually do this work. So these are so that's the fern gully. And then just more recently, building on our 2020 master plan, which is increasing the arid precinct, we've created the arid garden. And again, this is a garden with an amazing story, but from a master planning point of view, it's using plants that basically will take us into the 2090 period without a shadow of doubt. But it also has an amazing landscape story, which has been thrilling for us to be able to bring to the Botanic Gardens. And so these are just some shots of the arid. We've had the sensory garden, which is that last piece of work from the fern gully. And then just recently, this is the project I'm working on at the moment, and this is the Australian drylands, and we're running a project really a path from the volcano down to D Gate, but there's going to be a real focus on climate change here and working with plants that basically can live and exist in a much warmer climate. And we're creating a couple of really interesting node points, and the second stage will all be around teaching. So through the master plan, it enacts a culture here that allows us to change in a process that is careful and thought about, but it actually brings real life and energy to the gardens. So I could only encourage you to be involved wherever you can, or to enact a master plan if you don't already have one. So I think that's about it for me, Chris. Oh, there's one more.
This will be working. Yes, it is. I can hear that. Thank you, Claire and Andrew. Really beautiful presentations there, and sharing all the work that we do at Melbourne Gardens. We do have a little bit of time, around about 15 minutes, just to do a bit of Q&A, and I'm just going to sort of restrict that just to Claire and Andrew at the moment, but hopefully we'll have a bit of time just to throw it out to the audience. But always some burning questions around these topics, and I thought we'd just offer the opportunity for Claire and Andrew to sort of share a bit more about their work and how they go about their activities in a day-to-day sense as well, but also, you know, maybe share some take-home messages for you as well. So I'll start with you, Claire, if I can.
Yes.
Good. How could the Landscape Succession Toolkit be utilised by Botanic Gardens guides?
Thank you. I'm going to hold it up here. So this is kind of what it looks like. And it's packed full of an incredible amount of research ideas, the benefits, how you go about undertaking your own your Landscape Succession Toolkit. And I'd suggest you take it to your next meetings and share it with people. One of the other ways that I could talk about utilising this is your ability, particularly as guides, to use your, and I'll quote, soft power. And I use that as a term that Sharon Willoughby, she's the head of interpretation at Kew, recently referred to at the Botanic Gardens Congress in Melbourne. And it's the way that Botanic Gardens have that unique ability to really connect people with nature, and you as people talking to those visitors every day have that opportunity. So it is familiarising yourself, understanding the high-level themes and using them exactly what you do and talk to with all of the visitors that you have. So that's probably enough.
Thank you, Claire. And how would you go about involving staff in implementing strategic plans like the Landscape Succession Strategy or Living Collections Plan? All too often these plans are developed and they sit on the shelf and no one really looks at them or cares much for them. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes into developing them. So just some sort of thoughts and insights on how you engage with your staff to make sure that they're part of their everyday work.
Well, I guess all of our projects are landscape succession projects. So when Andrew has work that is happening with the master plan, it starts with that overarching theme of how we are going to incorporate landscape succession. As I mentioned earlier, it's how we change now in order to stay the same. So it's implementing that in all of our discussions, I guess. So that's where we start. We think about what the landscape's going to look like in that future climate and how it can inform what's happening with master planning. So that thinking needs to be embedded in everything that we do. So our strategic documents from the master plan, Livings Collections Plan, the tree strategy, which will be with us soon, and also obviously the landscape succession strategy are ways that we consider and implement landscape succession on a daily basis.
And I have to say, it makes our jobs as land managers far easier if all staff are on board in regard with those directions. It's not us continually sort of flogging them to get them to sort of take that direction or move in that direction. They're coming to us with initiatives and projects in terms of how can they help and how can they respond, how can their work, no matter how small it might be on a day-to-day basis, move towards that overall goal of delivering these strategic documents. Might just move to you, Andrew, for a couple of questions. So hypothetical, my garden doesn't have a master plan. How would you suggest we start developing one?
Thanks, Chris. I probably could be repeating myself, but the way we always do it here, surely, I mean, it is a bit more of a sophisticated landscape than even in your home garden. I always encourage students or people just to start a master plan, and it starts actually by setting up a process of really your values and what you want to achieve, and then really trying to understand who are the stakeholders involved in the garden. And we have a lot of stakeholders in these gardens, including the staff, obviously, but staff aren't just horticultural staff. We have scientific staff, we have education staff, we have a whole range of different staff that all want their little piece of the action. We also have City of Melbourne that we bounce off. We have the Friends, we have the Vol Guides, we have the general public that come in here. We have Heritage Victoria that can come in here and throw their weight around as well. So by creating a master plan, but by going out and talking and really we ask three questions, what are we doing well, what are we not doing so well, and what would we wish for? And that's really the three guiding questions that actually start the ball rolling in a master plan. And you can do that even if it's just you and your partner at home creating a master plan for the garden. You're trying to consider all the stakeholders initially, and then you try to understand what you're trying to keep and what's important, what needs improving, what's looking a little bit tired and old, and really you can start to pull together a pretty good list of things that need to be done. Now, as guides in a major botanic gardens, you possibly can't. You can certainly be part of a master plan, but you can certainly ask the questions if you don't have a master plan why we don't, because when we have such a beautiful garden, just a new director coming into that garden can really upset the apple cart, and many botanic gardens have actually fallen victim to fashion or to directors' whims, and a master plan holds. And it's not actually ego-driven, it's actually sort of holding the space for everybody. And that's also including the habitat and the wildlife that it supports as well. So there really are great tools. I better not keep talking.
Thanks, Andrew. I've got another one for you. Okay, so I've got my master plan, all well and good. Of course, master plan projects are by and large of a conceptual nature, so they're more than thought bubbles, but they need significant design development to realise them. So I've got my master plan. Could you explain a little bit in terms of the process in implementing a master plan project? And what are some of the steps that you might go through?
Thanks, Chris. So what the master plan does is basically sets out over 10 years, or the one we've just completed, 20 years, what we're going to try and achieve. So it literally has a list of things that we're going to try and achieve. And actually we've got a really good history here of doing these things in an organised way. But of course, you don't actually know which project's going to go off first until someone shows a little bit of interest in a project, and quite often Chris and myself or Claire are involved in going out, meeting a donor, meeting an organisation and talking through maybe 2 or 3 projects that we feel are a bit of a good fit for those people. And then once we get a bite, literally that activates the full design documentation. So we have a fantastic development branch in here that sets these meetings up for myself and Chris and Claire, and we basically wait until we get a bite. So we present those plans, we present those bobble ideas out of the master plan, and then when they're interested and excited in one that goes off, basically that lands, and then that triggers us to go into full design documentation because we've got some certainty around that project is going to go forth. Then we design doc in-house, which is really good, and then we go out and we put that through tender process and we build those gardens generally with the contractors, and then we as the horticulturists, we take on the soft landscaping. So we'll often grow a lot of the plants and do a lot of the soft landscaping at the end of those projects. What's really important is that we've got that structure of how it works through the master plan, and then our philanthropy and making sure that they land, and then really contractors understanding the work they're doing in here, and it all should unfold reasonably easily at that point.
Thanks, Andrew. In addition, we do have timelines within the master plan, so we have short, medium and long-term project priorities, so 1 to 5, 6 to 10 and 11 to 20 year horizons for our project planning. And of course those can change depending on, if we get a wealthy donor says I've got $5 million to spend on X, we're not going to shoo them out the door. So we're more than happy to sort of shift those priorities. But I think it is important just in terms of how we prioritise the development of the landscape. And one of the things we've been doing in the last 10 years is taking a precinct approach. So it's not just about doing one small project in one corner of the gardens, it's developing a whole area of the gardens, and that's typified in projects like the Fern Gully, which probably had 7 or 8 different elements over 10 years, and now the Arid Precinct, which has got a similar amount of elements, and we're still continuing to develop that as well. I'll move back to you, Claire. So where could a garden start on their climate change journey?
I think I'll just do a shameless plug here for the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens. I would suggest that maybe when you go back to your gardens is to ask whether they are a member. And I was talking earlier about tiny tasks, about those easy steps to take. Join the Alliance. Free tools on that, so the Landscape Succession Toolkit. Again, downloading and having a look at that and seeing what you can achieve. It's not something that needs to be undertaking as one big rapid change. It can't be. But the good thing about the toolkit, and I guess the Alliance, is that you know that you're part of something bigger, that you know that you're part of a collective of other botanic gardens all trying to make and adjust to this change as well. And also, I'll talk about the CAT, or that climate assessment tool. It is for trees at this stage. And we decided on trees because they're long-lived species, and they're the species that we need to get right at this time. We need to leave plants that are going to be climate suited, but also they're really good for research and to hand on to that generation next, I would say. So a tiny task. Join the Climate Change Alliance Botanic Gardens, look at the Landscape Succession Toolkit and just see what you can do, because every change helps.
Thanks, Claire. I know we are close to time. Rosemary's watching me eagerly. I've got a couple more, so we'll try and squeeze them in. Last one for you, Claire, then you're off the hook. What are the major challenges in implementing landscape succession?
I've got to say it's got to be resources. So currently I'm here at Melbourne Gardens, but I have worked at Botanic Gardens that similar size, so 38 hectares, but maybe have 4 staff. So resources are a key thing. So that collaboration and that networking opportunity whenever you can, and I think this is a really strong point here for the guides, is to continue to advocate for that, or using climate succession in the way that you talk to people. And a way that you could go about doing that is to just select one tree and talk about its climate suitability and include that in your talks. I guess resources are something that we all face, but again, it's not, I have to just bring it back to that, take or do as much as you can, because every action is a contribution. And perhaps I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Claire. So final question. We're very fortunate to have a landscape architect and indeed a master plan as well, and I know a lot of gardens don't have either of those, let alone both of them. So, Andrew, what if a garden doesn't have a landscape architect or a master plan? What do they do?
Well, actually, it's important, I think, to have a landscape architect or a landscape designer, and I will obviously say that. But, what sits behind that is more important is the process and the understanding of getting your master plan done. And sometimes you could do, you can get you can contract a landscape architect, which is what we do down at Cranbourne, and that works okay, providing people within the organisation are actually driving the process and understand the process. Because what happens, and I've got such a privileged position here, but it's actually such a good, strong culture here around master planning that we've sort of worked on for many years to actually have that in place. But if you don't have a landscape architect, you can go and get one, and that's okay. But more importantly is how you drive that process, and you continue to drive that process, and making sure that you're including those stakeholders, you're going through your listening stage, you're producing, and this is where the landscape architect gets involved, is producing the drawings that reflect that consultation, and then you're getting feedback on that, and then you're producing a document. Look, and they're so important for planning, but they're also important for funding submissions these days. Very few, governments will not give you funding unless you've got some sort of master plan, which is giving those organisations confidence that you're moving in the right direction. So, yeah, that's about all I can say, Chris.
That's a great way to wrap up, Andrew, and perfect response. And looks like we're going to be kicked off the stage. Over to you, Rosemary.
I'm sure you'd all like to thank them for a fantastic presentation. You've got lots of things to think about when you get back to your own gardens, especially if you don't have a master plan. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. I'll just remind you, so if you can either head to the toilets or we've got 10 minutes to be out onto Oak Lawn. The shepherds will be out there to hold up a sign for your next walk or tour. Thank you.
I was going to put in a plug for the third gallery